Hello and welcome to the Backseat Designers. I am one of your hosts. I'm the Space Quest historian, sometimes known by a unpronounceable Scandinavian name. I am joined, as always, by a man who spent 10 years of his life butting heads with a bunch of Space Quest nerds to make the fan game Valhalla Strikes Back, also known as Monkey Island in Space. Hello, Frederick.
Hello, you're neglecting to mention that I was also a Space Quest nerd, or, am a Space Quest nerd. I can't claim to be a historian, but,
If you worked 10 years on a fucking fan game, I would assume you would be a fan of the source material.
9 years.
9? Oh, dreadfully sorry.
Big mistake there, straight from the gate.
We're just under the length of the space venture development. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Today we are unfortunately not joined by a man who will soon make the front page news for murdering his landlord, Dr. Gareth Millward. Frederick, what was the story there? He blew up a generator or something?
Well, I mean, let's go a few months back. It all started with the domain expiring, right? This guy just has awful luck with tech, and this is going to be a running joke from now on.
Oh, from now on. I thought it was since the first episode. Yeah. Dr. Gareth Millward, PhD in history and just an all-around British gentleman, apparently cannot figure out how to turn his fucking computer on. But this time, he didn't trip over a cable. His landlord apparently did, and he is without internet, which is the closest you can get to capital punishment in our country. So...
And he's old school enough to have a limited data plan, which is, 2024. That means you're asking for it.
Absolutely. Well, personal qualms aside, we are also joined by an esteemed guest today, and that would be Mark Yohalem. God damn, I am trying my best there. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. And, I know my colleague James Spanos hoped to be here too. I think he passed out from working 24 hours straight on various game projects. But if he wakes up, I expect he will burst in like the Kool-Aid man with all sorts of interesting insights of his own.
We're just beset by good luck at the moment. This is the day I'm going to start playing the lottery. I can feel it.
Oh, absolutely. And there will be a day or two, and then you will be announcing a divorce, moving out your house, living in a cardboard box, and the podcast will continue unabated, as always. So that's pretty much where we're at. This is already a clusterfuck, and we haven't even gone 3 minutes into the proceedings. It's going to be great. We should probably mention our guest's credentials. Mark is part of Wormwood Studios. They develop Primordia and Strangeland, which, full disclosure, are two games that I should play and should have played many years ago, but haven't. So
you haven't played Primordia or Strangeland?
Neither have you.
What the hell is... Well, you weren't supposed to say that.
But I did. I came out of the gate. So, pray tell, Mark, what should we do to atone for our sins?
You should obviously play Primordia and Strangeland.
That was
it's the
predictable.
only way to atone.
But it's also a nice segue into our topic, which is going to be a little bit more abstract, since we did our research so poorly that we neglected to touch either game. And we've talked about adventure game engines before, or tried talking about engines. I remember one episode that went particularly off the rails and only turned to the topic around 45 minutes in. But we're going to talk about the engine that you guys have been using for these titles, Adventure Game Studio.
Which is a lovely free adventure game development toolkit used by many illustrious developers around the world, including friends of the show, Dave Gilbert of Wedged Games, Francisco Gonzalez of Grundislav Games, and a host of other lovely people. And I think it's fair to say that your titles, Mark, have also made an indelible mark in the adventure game genre as a whole. And it's particularly noteworthy that they are built with what is ostensibly a free, pick it up, run with it game engine. What led you guys to use AGS in the first place?
So I think it's the community. And to me, that's one thing that sets AGS maybe not apart, because many smaller game development tools have these very intense, loyal, and generous communities around them. I had spent years working with Inform, which was a parser engine with similar longevity to AGS. And likewise, there, the community was small, um, but incredibly collegial, full of brilliant people from around the world, and always generous with their time and supportive of people learning how to use the engine. And that's something that if you go on the AGS forums, you're not going to see 6 million posts. You're not going to see 1,000 commercial games that are being released every year in AGS. But what you will see is very long-standing community in which people are very generous with helping each other out. And ultimately, that was where the Primordia development team all connected through the Help Wanted forum on the AGS forums. And I had attempted making graphical adventures long before Primordia in different engines. There was one called Agast, I believe, Agast.
Yes, I remember that one, and I might get into why later, but yeah, that was there.
And then there was an engine called Sphere, which had been sort of like a spin-off of another JRPG type engine that was being used a bit. And then I had experimented with coder friends trying to make our own engines, because there is sort of an impulse to do that. But what AGS I think offered was this community, and that if what you're trying to do is the sort of simplest level, um, basic adventure game, it is extremely welcoming. The engine itself, not just the community, the engine is one in which you just start throwing in assets, you start creating rooms. You can very easily say, oh, yeah, I have a 40-room game, and you can go through all the rooms. There are 100 items. Anyone can do that pretty quickly in AGS. And then as you layer on top of that more complexity, the engine gets harder and harder to work with. But at that entry point, it's very nice for prototyping and for people who have no programming experience or skill to be able to get some kind of game moving. And so I think that's part of why it's so popular. Some of these other engines have had and still have a higher barrier to entry, and they don't have the same community around it.
I absolutely agree. I've dabbled in AGS myself with some jam games and a whole library of unfinished projects. And every time I run into a stumbling block, all I have to do is pretty much just type into Google, what the fuck is up with this, and site : adventuregamestudio.co.uk, and up comes the answer, typically written by Snarky, the community member, who has just an infinite knowledge of how the engine works. It's interesting you brought up Inform, the text adventure engine. If I may just take a little detour already, not even 10 minutes in, we're already detouring. It's interesting you bring up that one, because I've also looked at certain text, because I can't draw for shit. That's my problem. So I've been looking into what other avenues for storytelling could I possibly use. I've looked at Quest, the text adventure engine that looks a bit like Infocom, which also has a fairly easy barrier of entry. And then there's Inform, which is a very, very interesting way of putting together text adventures. I don't know if you're familiar, Frederick, but you basically write full English sentences, as in, there is a room, in the room is a table, on the table is a box, inside the box is, and then you just go on, and the game sort of interprets that pre-Chat GPT style to actually build a game around it.
Yeah, I think I heard about that, but I've never. I mentioned Aghast earlier because when we started the Space Quest fan game that I worked on, Vohol Strikes Back, it came down to a choice largely between Aghast and AGS, and the latter just seemed easier to work with. I've never really dabbled in text adventures much, but obviously sounds like the text adventure variant of AGS as far as intuitiveness goes.
Yeah, that's kind of strange because I ran into I tried both Quest and Inform. Inform 7 was the one I picked, and for some reason, see, I'm not a programmer either, but I can work my way around the scripting language of Adventure Game Studio. As Mark put it, it's the entry barrier is fairly low, and you can fairly quickly do a lot of things that are just, your basic point and click adventure game thing. You don't really need to be a programmer to get this thing to work. And for some reason, my brain could not wrap around the idea of putting full English language input into an engine and have it do that. Mark, how did you? Are you, first of all, how skilled are you in the world of programming, and second of all, how did you wrap your brain around how Inform worked?
So it's too bad James isn't here because he would delight in shouting at me. I was a very good programmer in Quick Basic, a pretty good programmer in Logo Writer, a decent programmer in Turbo Pascal, and then okay at scripting languages. But any useful programming language from like the last 35 years, I have almost no familiarity. So all the time when we were programming things in Primordia or Strangeland, I would propose, or in Fallen Gods, our current project, I would give James like, well, if this were Quick Basic, I would do it da-da-da-da. And he would lose his mind because he'd be like, this isn't fucking Quick Basic. People, that's not how it works. Like, no one, what, you're going to put in line numbers, Mark? Is that what you're going to do?
Put in a go-to.
Yeah.
But so I had the same experience with Inform that you did, but here's the thing. Until Inform 7, that is not how Inform was. Up till Inform 7, it was basically like a pared down object-oriented programming language. And then they switched it, and I got vertigo basically trying to use the new engine and stopped doing it. But the earlier ones are much more like Quest, or TADS is another one of these. TADS and Inform were kind of rivals for a long time. The new one I have not been able to manage. I also played around a little with like Twine, Ink Writer. There are like a few of these other storytelling tools. But to me, I've always enjoyed the collaborative aspect of game development too. And so working with, someone, on graphics and someone else on sound and someone else on code is actually part of the pleasure, typically, of game development for me. And again, with AGS, up to a point, it's very helpful on this. I can talk about some of the drawbacks that you hit with it as well.
We'll get there.
But from walking in the front door, it's very easy to drop assets into it, relatively easy to drop text into it. Although I will say this is one of the places where you start to see AGS's age, right? Most game development environments now, you would have the text sort of separate from the source code in a way that it's not in AGS. But it was it was a great place to start. And when we started, our plan was to make a little freeware game. That was the initial concept, was robot game, the freeware game, that was going to be short and kind of slapstick. And then it grew from there. But AGS is a great entry point for a freeware game. And I think when we started, there was almost no commercial AGS presence other than a game called The Adventures of Fat Man, and then I think Dave had released maybe the first and second Blackwell games. But this was before Gemini Rue, which I think really kind of blew open the commercial AGS space.
Yeah.
And so we were just thinking of it as, it's a freeware engine for making freeware games.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention Gemini Rue because when that released, I think 2011 or 2012, that was the year of the first AGS awards ceremony that followed the release of our Space Quest fan game, Valhalla Strikes Back. So we were at the the online awards ceremony, and I just remember Gemini Rue sweeping the floor with everyone else. Nearly every single award went to Gemini Rue. We got like a supporting character award, but I don't think anyone knew exactly which supporting character won the award, and no one really cared because the major awards all went to Gemini Rue. So that definitely felt like a watershed moment because there was real buzz going around based on this game and what the devs of that had managed to achieve within this engine, which it does have its limitations. I get the impression that a lot of more capable developers than myself have managed to mod it to an extent where you can now do a lot of stuff in it that you couldn't before. But certainly speaking about limitations, another game that I worked on and the Trolls worked on that was developed in AGS was Stair Quest. And I'm sadly very, very guilty of introducing a glitch in the special edition of that that is now being exploited by speedrunners. So that's good, I guess. But we introduced the snow level where there's a Yeti chasing you, and we introduced some ice mechanics where you slip a bit every time you stop your character. Anyway, the complexity of the background was such that I just ran out of walkable areas and walk behinds. So at some point I just had to leave it and go, you know what? It's fine with the result that you can like get from one end of the level to another by just going through the right spot, basically no clipping through the area. So it does have its limitations, but in my experience, you have to go pretty far before you start to hit them. So that's nice.
Yeah, and I just want to circle back real quick because Mark mentioned the spirit of the community and how collaborative and welcoming they are. Just the fact that there is something called the AGS Awards, which is, like you said, an online ceremony where AGS developers get together, both commercial and freeware developers, to pat each other on the back and say, "Good job, you did really well." That just speaks to that community spirit. Mark, have you ever been like part of that whole AGS Awards thing?
I haven't. In part, I think you had to like download a special client to do it.
Yes.
And there was some reason I couldn't get it to work on my machine. James may have actually programmed the client, or at least had a hand in it. So maybe he's culpable. But it does seem like the whole awards and the fact that there's this client, and it has the vibe of I don't know how old you guys are, but like Moos and Muds and Mushes back in like the early 90s, where it was these small communities of sort of passionate polymaths who came together around gaming, but not in the sort of traditional like hardcore competitive gaming mindset. It was much more had the feel of like people in like a college rec room having beers and chatting rather than fighting it out on a rugby pitch.
Yeah, and quickly speaking to that client, like you said, when the awards happen, it's this. You download a client which is made in AGS, and what it does is it taps into an IRC channel to make the chat happen. But it's the client itself is pretty much like a one-room adventure game where you got these characters walking around, and every time you type something in the chat, it appears above their heads, Monkey Island style. But what it's actually doing is it's pulling the chat messages from that IRC channel and putting it above people's heads. That's what. As far as the extendability, if that is a word, sorry, second language, and being able to mold the engine into some pretty advanced shit. It's kind of amazing that you can get it to do that when it is ostensibly just, pick it up, make a graphic adventure game, plop in some assets, do a little bit of scripting, and off you go. But once you dive under the covers, so to speak, it suddenly becomes a pretty powerful tool if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I would say so. I'm just thinking of like ways in which the engine has been broken and put back together in unusual ways.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was Yahtzee made a kind of flashback out of this world kind of game. I
Yes.
can't remember the name, and then he made this privateer-ish kind of game, or maybe Star Trek 25th anniversary kind of game called Galaxies of Fantabulous Wonderment. And then, of course, James Spanos made Until I Have You, which is as abusive it's abusive of the system and abusive of its players. But it's unbelievable that you can make an action platformer that's that fluid in an engine that's intended to be not merely a point and click engine, but a point and click engine for a very specific kind of game, right? It was clearly made with the Space Quest series in mind at the outset, and then is sort of, had increasingly large areas of accretion around it. But the fundamental building blocks of AGS are still very much traditional point and click Sierra adventure game structure. And yet it's able to do these things for a multi-user chat room or a platformer or a space opera game. That's really extraordinary. I'm not sure that's a healthy use of the engine, because it probably would be much easier to make that in anything other than Quick Basic. But if you were to make that in JavaScript or something, it might be easier.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of click and play now. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that, but I spent lots and lots of hours in my childhood trying to create good games in click and play, and I kind of get the same vibe from AGS as far as intuitiveness goes. It's not always the most advanced tool, at least not in its vanilla state, but mess around with it and you can create some pretty impressive stuff. Our good friend Chris Ushko of Box of Mystery Games actually managed to create a pretty convincing series of point and click games in click and play. He made these really wacky remakes of Monkey Island 2, only stylized as MI:2, as in Mission Impossible 2. Called, I think the subtitle was The Devil's Triangle, or maybe I'm confusing that with another game, but it basically saw Guybrush Threepwood recast as an action hero, and everything just went completely off the rails. And when I played that, I kind of had that same feeling as what you describe. I can't believe someone actually pulled apart this thing that I would get so frustrated over as a child, and created something with it that should not be physically possible. But that's Chris for you, and thank God there are people like that out there.
That's amazing.
I think that's right. Click and play and Flash, I would put in that category too. Click and play. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the developer Derek Yu. He and I were actually high school classmates, but I believe his first game was Eternal Daughter, which was in click and play. And then from there, he made Aquaria and then Spelunky, and now is, I don't know, a very successful game developer. But a lot of these things were incubated. Again, Flash is the same thing. Environments that really weren't necessarily intended to make this level of a sophisticated game. I don't know if you guys ever used hypertext back in the Macintosh days, but the hypertext was a similar thing where it was not remotely intended for these kinds of purposes. And yet that's how, human beings love to play games, and so games emerge out of them. My first commercial project was working on a Game Boy Color role-playing game, and the programmers for it had gotten their start making role-playing games for TI calculators, and you could TIs actually used QuickBasic as their main programming language. So I did make games on TIs, but they found a way to write assembly code into a TI calculator and made what amounted to like an Ultima 3 clone on a calculator. So you could be there in like your trigonometry class pretending to do, I don't know, sine over cosine, and in reality, you're playing Joltima and leveling up. I don't know. To me, all of this, the demo scene is another area where,
Oh, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
as much as I love, and don't love Unity, Unity is much more polished, commercial, extensible, all of these things. Maybe that is that the right word? Extensible?
I don't know.
Extendable? Now you've made me self-conscious about that word.
I mean, it's really funny when game development turns into kind of a game in its own right. Can I break this device? Can I break this engine? We talked about remakes and remasters and demasters in an earlier episode, and I don't think we necessarily covered this during the episode, but I'm always amazed when someone takes a more modern game and ports it to an earlier device. So, if you turn your back a minute, someone will have ported The Seventh Guest with full motion video to, I don't know, CX Spectrum or Commodore 64 or what have you. It's so entertaining to see that happen. Or the TI calculator, which I'm sure runs Doom.
It does.
I've no doubt it does.
I've seen it. It does.
Yeah, I think, I at some point in Primordia's development, I said, making an adventure game is like playing an adventure game, because your solutions to problems, first of all, the problems seem to occur at unexpected times. Sometimes innocuous decisions made early in your experience turn out to have tremendously negative ramifications, as if you were playing King's Quest 2 or Kyrandia or something and discover you can't beat the game because you ate both apples when you only were supposed to eat one apple. So too with adventure game design, and then the solutions to these problems often require combining, particularly in the AGS engine, combining things in ways they were not intended to be combined, like the proverbial rubber ducky fishing rod in The Longest Journey.
Oh, God.
I would say under the hood of Primordia and Strangeland, if you could see the amazing things that James did in coding those two games, you would see those kinds of solutions where he would find a function that was intended to do one thing and another function intended to do something else, and combine them to do something totally different from how either of the two was initially intended. But this, I will say, I don't want to postpone forever complaining about the AGS engine, because I'm a complainer.
Let's just get to it.
Yeah. So the problem is it has these serious limitations, where it's 27 years old. It began as a DOS-based engine. And of course, it's been rebuilt many times, but it has these legacy effects. One of the most dramatic is the way AGS saves games is simply by dumping the active memory into a file and then loading the active memory. That includes dynamic sprites, which are in memory, get dumped into your saved game. So number one, the save games are gigantic. But number two, there are many kinds of game assets that AGS loads into memory as you play that aren't variables. And so if you change a graphic, if you add a new audio file, you run the significant risk of breaking saves because the memory profile of the game has changed since the last patch. And so one of the things we would struggle, James and I have patched Primordia, particularly James, has patched Primordia probably 50 times since release. Some of those were big patches, some of them were small patches, but many of them we were figuring out how much can we do without breaking a save, because we're loading something new into memory and working around those pitfalls. So that's one example of a challenge we worked with. Another is that very early on, fans approached me about translating Primordia into various languages, which was very exciting. The first translation was into Russian, and it was done by hackers, which I thought was amazing. I still don't know how they accomplished it, but it was basically a fan hack of the game to put it in Russian. The others were collaborations with French, German, Spanish, and ultimately many other languages. Um, but but immediately we ran into a new problem, which is the font size, not in terms of pixel height, but in terms of the number of characters in a font in AGS is very low. It's designed for the English language, which has 26 lowercase and uppercase letters, and that's it. But other languages have all kinds of diacritical marks. And some of those languages, many of those languages, the number of marks exceeds the number of characters that you can easily use in the character set. So if you look at the text output of like Primordia's French translation, you'll see in places where you would expect to see an accented letter, there might be an ampersand or a $sign or a caret or a tilde or some other punctuation character that we have excised from the French font and replaced with an accented character. But ultimately, we just couldn't do Japanese because at the time we had a fabulous fan who loved it, was he was just a beautiful writer, thinker. And he basically said, look, you can do, there is a phonetic way of doing Japanese. Japanese has multiple alphabets, but it comes across as very, very childish to a reader, and it would not be suitable for Primordia. But the other ones, the number of characters are so far beyond the maximum character limit in the font that though he had translated the game, we could not actually implement it. And those are just a couple of the examples. And I don't know if you guys want to jump in, or I can just hit the last grievance before that. Up to you guys.
I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to take a stab at it, and then I'll throw the mic back to you. I just want to say yes. I absolutely the whole save game issue is you change one line in the global script, which is the script that keeps that glues all the rooms and the logic and all that stuff together in AGS. You change one line, and the whole fucking thing just falls apart. You have to go begging to your loyal customers and say, yeah, sorry, all your save games are fucking broken. You're going to have to start again. Okay, I'm going to take a stab at your last grievance. I'm going to say portability.
It is not. Oh, that's fair enough. That is a grievance, but the one I was going to hit before that is actually cutscenes. So, in Primordia in particular, it's very easy to have two characters just standing there talking. Mm-hmm. That's AGS is great at that. Walking and talking, like the Red Letter Media when they made fun of the Star Wars prequels. You could do that. Two characters standing and talking, two characters walking and talking. But as you try to get more complicated in the timing and custom animations and things like that, the problem is there isn't a like what you see is what you get in the way that when you're doing even in a Flash game, a cutscene, you can tweak something, play it, watch it again, tweak it, play it, watch it again. In AGS, you would have to compile it and then run it and then go back and tweak it, recompile it, rerun it, and there's a considerable lag time. And so that with a team where James and I and Vic were all on different time zones, different parts of the world, getting the cutscenes done right was like, I have the emails of like, I don't know, 70 emails between me and James trying to get these cutscenes to look better. And it's very difficult. It's more difficult than in any other engine that I've ever worked in.
Unless you just do FMVs, which are also a headache in and of itself, because AGS supports the OGG and OGB formats natively, which, if you don't know, are open source alternatives to MP3 and MP4. It also does support MP4, but the thing is, if you use MP4s or any sort of movie format that's not OGG or OGB, they will reside next to your game code. It won't compile into the data file itself, which means that people can just look in your game directory and just play all the cutscenes that they want. And OGB is just a fickle fucking format. So you could get away with just doing it as an FMV, but then you run into all the other headache issues, which is you can't put subtitles on top of OGVs. You can't put character sprites. I'm thinking of like the PC port of Final Fantasy VII, where they had FMVs playing in the background, but then they had the character sprites, or I guess they were 3D models, on top interacting with the pre-rendered video backgrounds. You can't do that. So yeah, that I can totally see where you're coming from. You have to have immense capabilities in terms of timing animations, and you have to because the weight ticker in the background of AGS is also a fickle beast, because it doesn't run. It's not tied entirely to the computer clock. So on some systems it runs a little faster, and some systems it runs a little slower. So you can't really rely on the ticking clock inside of AGS. I'm rambling a bit. Frederick, you had something?
No, I mean that's another issue that I remember that we had with Valhalla Strikes Back, and which went into the released version, was starting and stopping music and lining up other cues after playing one piece of music was just horrendous. And in the final game we put out, there are several instances where it just goes silent. It's meant to loop or it's meant to start something else, but nope, music just stops. I remember having a hell of a time with that, and also trying to fix it for the talkie version, which eventually went unreleased. I think what I came up with for that was slightly better, but that was just causing massive headaches to me. And, it would do one thing during one playtest and do another thing during another playtest. So, yeah, in terms of pulling, I think asset management in AGS is extremely easy, but sometimes the in-game handling of those assets at runtime is a bit more complicated than it has any right to be.
Yeah, because you end up having to rely on the timer, especially if you've got, like Mark was saying, you got a complex animation of a character doing something while they're talking, and you have to time the animation to the dialogue. That is nearly impossible without having to go in and fuck around with the timer. For those who don't know, AGS has what's the limit on the amount of timers you can have in AGS? It's like really small, isn't it? It's like 11 or 12 or something.
Probably closely tied to the limit of walkable areas.
Oh God, yeah. And those timers cannot. You base it's global inside the engine. You have, let's just say it's 12. I can't remember, but you have 12 timers, and they are absolutely tied to what you want to do. Sure, you can set them and you can look for when the timer runs out and all that. But if that timer is also used elsewhere in the game, then shit will absolutely break. It's the whole, bubbles in the wallpaper thing you have to constantly watch out for. So how do you guys work around those problems with the cutscenes and the animation timing and all that?
I mean, it was just brute force,
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, the one thing that's nice about having developed the game remotely is we have a pretty complete written record of how things were done. And going back and you look, and yeah, it's just these lots and lots of emails. When we shipped the game initially, I think James and I and probably everyone felt like we had a target date and we had to ship. The game had been in development a long time. I think initially the hope had been to release over a year earlier, and so we had to get it to market. But we knew that there was a lot that we could do better. and so post-release, we had one, particularly major patch that we worked on for months, but a lot of it was just this like, replay, replay, and each time with me sending these emails to James that are like issues list 1 through 75. Like they were absurdly, and him responding with, "You're killing me," but fine. But yeah, it was very cumbersome. And you're right, portability is another issue
Oh
where,
yeah, here we go.
yeah, like, why did I set out to port it to mobile devices? There was like one person, I think, in the world who was good at porting AGS to Android devices, and he stopped doing it. So there was the end of Android devices. For iOS, Janet Gilbert, Dave's wife, who's a fantastic programmer herself, handled the Primordia port, but it was like, it's not like Unity, right, where it's just like rebuild in a different environment. It required really a heavy lift. And then with Switch, uh, James really took over. James now does all the porting for Wajidai's catalog. He may work with Janet on some of them, but he does a lot of the work himself for all their games, not just the ones where he was the developer. But he got Primordia to the Switch, but on Strangeland, there is one graphical call in the game for one of the graphical effects that we do, because he did all these cool visual effects for different parts in the game. And one of those effects just doesn't work on the Switch. And like, there's again some middleware third party who facilitates the port to the Switch. I don't know if it's like basically an emulator that AGS is running within or what it is, but somewhere there's a breakage. And so, James spent a long time working on it, got it to like 95% releasable, but we're just stuck. There's no, that effect is so integrated into the game that we can't just release the game without the effect, but we also can't release the game with the effect because it doesn't work. And that's really, it is frustrating, um, because I would love to see our games on as many platforms as possible. I've always felt like the thing I most want is just people to play our games and enjoy them. I don't particularly care if they sell for a penny, if they sell for $1, if they sell for $10, whatever. I just want people to be able to play and engage with these stories and these characters and these worlds that mean so much to me, and see the amazing artwork that Vic did and the great programming that James did and Nathaniel's music and all of that would be great. But it turns out it's quite difficult with AGS. So, but then you try to leave AGS, and it turns out like the grass is not greener on every other side of the fence. Like, there's Visionaire and Wintermute. There, Unity has an adventure game suite in it. For Cloudscape, a project we worked on for a little while, we were attempting to make that one in Love 2D for a little bit. And all of these engines have many upsides over AGS because of their modernity. But ultimately, there's a reason that even Wadjai Games, which is like the premier AGS indie adventure game developer, Dave tried messing around with other engines for Old Skies, and ultimately decided Old Skies should be an AGS. And the AGS engine keeps getting better too. The most recent version is more compatible. They've solved that font issue. They've made like all community things, it grows, maybe not as fast as it would grow if there were some profit motive behind it, but it's still growing and improving. And it fits like a well-seasoned glove. It's nice sometimes to use the engine that you've known and used for many years.
Yeah, and the good thing about AGS is, like you said, it is a non-profit thing. You can download AGS; it's absolutely freeware, and you're off and running. And the license for AGS is very forgiving. You can sell your game, you can put it on freeware, you can mod the engine. I believe it's even open source if you want to go poke around in it. Although I think very few people do. And I completely get what you're saying. I've tried dabbling in like Unreal because I wanted to do like something simple, like a walking simulator. Just walk around an area, and Unreal has this, node building, so you don't have to go into scripting. You can just connect nodes and see what they do. And I got a fair amount, into it, but everything that I would be able to knock out in 10 minutes in AGS, and again, I'm not a programmer. I very rarely know what I'm doing. Was just so cumbersome that the idea of the ease of porting it to different systems and the ability to have a 3D space you could walk around in and all this reflective lighting and stuff, it just seems like when you get into the weeds, it just seems like ultimately they're bells and whistles that you don't need to tell a story. By and large, with the exception of things like modern shooters or walking simulators or 3D, stuff that AGS can't handle because it is a 2D point and click tool, first and foremost. Other than that, AGS you can use it for anything from a text adventure to a parser game like SCI 0 Days. You can use it for graphical adventure games, pixel art, low res pixel art. You can bump the resolution up to HD 1920 by 1080. I think you can even bump it up to 4K if you like really want to stretch your limitations. There's just so many things that are good about the way AGS is wrapped up that it's very hard to go out and say, okay, yeah, I want to stretch my wings. I want to go play with quote unquote a real engine, which just turns out to be fucking hubris. But I do want to circle back to one thing you said, which was the whole portability issue. When I was making jam games in AGS, the one thing about AGS that completely boggles my mind is that it took them ages and decades and eons to just support Linux builds. And the Linux builds, I have friends who are Linux people. I'm not a Linux guy myself. The people who played the Linux builds of my games, which AGS natively compiled, they're garbage. They run like ass. And if you want to compile it for Mac, then fucking hats off to you. I had some dude in the AGS Discord, VGA3, what's his name? VGA 256, I think his name is. He ported my games to Mac. I have no idea how he did it. They ran about as good as they could, but again, they were running in some sort of wrapper around it. So the portability is, I mean, if you're developing for Windows, good on you. AGS runs about as well as you can expect anything to run in Windows. But once you want to move outside that bubble, good fucking luck to you.
It's really interesting that it wound up with such terrible portability. Let's be honest, we've just about said that so far, because I remember when we started developing Boho Strikes Back, which was in 2002, AGS would only have been like, according to Chris Jones's GitHub, which I'm going to go with, AGS started in 1999, so it would have been a pretty fairly new engine at that point. It still had
it was still DOS, wasn't it?
Yes, it still had a DOS interpreter at that point. I believe it. I never touched it at that point. We had another guy doing the programming, so I never got into the IDE. But certainly the engine could compile to DOS at that point. And then, as far as I can gather from looking up the history of it, they recompiled it or actually rewrote it around 2007, 2008 in .NET, which I guess might also be the root of the portability issues, because at that point, Microsoft was helmed by Steve Ballmer, who liked to sniff coke and dance around and yell developers a lot. And the rule of his day at Microsoft was that open source is evil. It's the plague. And now, of course, Microsoft is in a space where that doesn't apply, but Chris Jones probably has other things to do in his life as well, and same goes for all the other contributors to AGS. So I have a feeling that it'll get there at some point and it'll improve, because the .NET stuff that AGS is running underneath the hood is a lot more. Well, basically, it's open source now, and it's a lot easier to port, presumably. Just a couple of years ago, you had to resort to running Mono or something, which was like the open source implementation of .NET. Now you can just run pure .NET, but of course it's going to be a Herculean effort to update the engine to take advantage of that, I'm sure. But I have a feeling the community will get us there eventually. It's just frustrating right now for everyone else making games out there that getting your game onto different platforms should be so damn hard. So, let that be a word of warning to anyone who attempts to do a game engine. Portability, please do it.
Yeah, it must be top of the list, and I think the AGS community is just fucking sick of it at this point. When is it going to compile to Mac? Would you shut the fuck up, please?
To be fair, though, it's a bit less of an issue now because ScumVM supports a lot of AGS games out of the box, so that's great. If you can't actually port the damn game, just dump it into an emulator and run it there.
Yeah, I mean, so first, I don't know. I don't know the backstory of Microsoft and open source. Who knows? As a quick basic fan, I love Microsoft. But other than that, I think part of the disconnect is commercially, Mac and Linux are a trivially small part even of the niche indie game market. I always thought, because it's a very outspoken community, that they were also an important part of the economics of it. And James really pushed very early on to port Primordia to Linux. I think it may have been the first of the Wadidai Games titles ported to Linux. Because Linux players were like, when are we going to get it? When are we going to get it? But when you actually look at the sales figures, it's similar to translations. It turns out it doesn't really move the needle on sales at all. But the thing I will say is, if you go back to where we started the conversation, why AGS, the answer is community. And those kinds of small development communities are highly overrepresented with Linux and Mac users. And so it's always struck me as very weird, if you compare Inform, which from the get-go, I think was quite platform agnostic, to AGS, it's surprising to me because similar kinds of nerds love both, and nerds also love Linux. So you would think it would have a lot of Linux support, but it may also just be, as you say, there was the DOS period and then the .NET period, and a lot of legacy. I wouldn't be shocked if there were legacy elements from the DOS era that got into the .NET rebuild too. And the architecture just starts to assume that you're going to be on a Windows device or a PC of some kind, and it gets so integrated into everything, it's hard to change it. But that said, I feel pretty strongly as small or not, the Linux gaming community in particular is just so supportive of developers that developers ought to be supportive of Linux, because it's not just about sales, it's about the relationships you create with your players. And my experience, at least, has been that Linux users tend to be very passionate about the games that they play.
Yeah, we're almost coming up at the end. We try to cap these episodes at an hour, and we could keep talking about the strengths and the drawbacks of AGS development. I love tinkering around with AGS myself. I say I'm not a programmer, but I've gotten to the point where when I boot up AGS and I want to start a new project, because who cares about finishing projects? I just want to build something else. I've stopped using the built-in templates. I just start a blank game, and then I start coding stuff more or less from scratch, because so many of the elements in AGS that are hard coded into the engine, stuff like inventory management, stuff like dialogue trees and stuff like that, is already so accessible even with a blank template. that you can basically bend them to your will. It doesn't take a genius programmer to say, okay, my inventory should be contextual. Or when I have Jesus motherfucking Christ. Well, it depends on what you want to do. I cautiously want to add, but you could get away with some tweaking the UI. And I built a game that had a point-click interface, but with an optional parser. Lisa Suit Larry 7 style and stuff like that. But I think what I want to get at is with its strengths and limitations, what are some... Do you know what? Before you guys answer this question, I just want to know what caused Mark to physically explode there. What was that about?
It's the combination of allergies and a large nose. My sneezes are tremendous.
I thought you reacted to the thing I said about contextual inventory.
Well, that's the allergic reaction.
It's true.
I thought maybe you guys did something in Primordia or Strangeland where you were trying to just do a simple UI tweak and the whole thing fucking collapsed under its own weight, which wouldn't surprise me. I mean, again, my tinkering is not expert level or anything. Again, I just Google shit when stuff doesn't work. But I have made my own UIs and I have made stuff and tweaks and stuff like that. Okay, so the question I wanted to field around, and both for Frederick and Mark, although obviously starting with Mark, when you guys have been fucking around with AGS or other game engines for that matter, what's the thing you've built more or less from scratch that you're most impressed that you got working? Something that was oh shit, I have this really amazing brain fart. I wonder if I can get away with it. And you code it in, and it turns out it worked against all odds. What's the thing you're most proud of?
In Primordia, there's a puzzle where you rewire an engine. And it's it's based on a line drawing puzzle that was in the back of a doctor's office magazine when I was taking my daughter to the pediatrician. And it was one of these places where it kept not working right when James was, implementing it. And there was this one element, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it had to do with calculating whether one line crossed another, where if you moved the mouse fast enough, it was basically doing it by checking the pixel under the cursor. And if the pixel was the color of one of the other lines, it would say you've crossed the wires and it exploded. But if you whipped the cursor across, you could jump it and, thereby causing the puzzle to be cheated. And at least my recollection, and since James isn't here to gainsay it, is I programmed a solution to that in QuickBasic, showed him how it was done in QuickBasic, and he was able to implement it in AGS, and it worked. That's my story, and since, again, he's not here to gainsay it, it may be that he just said, sure, old man, by all means, we'll use QuickBasic. I guarantee that's your code that's going in, and then probably programmed it himself. But I remember feeling very satisfied when we finally got that puzzle working. It's an optional puzzle, but it's for fun. The art is cool in it, and it's more than just a typical use one item on another kind of puzzle.
Nice. Before I actually answer the question, because QuickBasic has been thrown around, I just want to mention that I kind of misspoke earlier when I said I hadn't dabbled in text adventures. My earliest programming experience, and now I'm actually a developer by trade, so I don't do a lot of programming in my spare time because I've done it all day at work.
Not adventure game developing.
No, not adventure game developing.
The boring kind.
Unless my employer really shifts gears, that could happen. No, my first experience with programming was loaning a book at the library with QBasic, or just basic, as it were, text adventures. It was half the book was like a guide on the programming language, rudimentary guide, and the second half was actual game code that you would just type in ad verbatim, and then it would compile. Now, I spent weeks typing in one of these text adventures, and as soon as I clicked run, it dawned on me that it would not work. And not actually knowing my way around this and being a kid, I had no idea how I would fix it. So that's my QBasic story. As far as AGS goes, it's a bit of a shame that our third host is absent, because when we did the Game Jam game called Late Last Night, Gareth had written this exquisite dialogue puzzle in one of the 3 areas of the game, where you had to talk to a bunch of various characters, like at least 3 or 4 of them, and try to get to the root of where this item you were looking for, your lighter, was. And I think I spent a whole day on that. That's, to this date, probably the most programming I've ever done in AGS. I haven't really worked on any large-scale game projects as a programmer, but I put myself forth to program this particular area. And I didn't get all the way there. I think the area as a whole was finished by someone else, but I was, this wasn't reinventing the wheel or anything, so I wasn't necessarily impressed with what I did, but I was impressed by how far I could get just using the dialogue editor. Obviously I needed to have variables to keep track of what you had talked with the various other characters about. But I could get a lot of the way just using the visual editors, and I thought that was that was a very interesting experience. And I'm sorry I didn't fully complete it, but just watching that run and getting closer and closer, that felt great. Eventually I had a bit of a minor breakdown over it, because it was one of those days where I never got out of my pajamas, and I was living on coffee. I don't think I actually ate anything that day, so by the end of the day my hands were shaking, and I was really tired of these vampires that this part of the story was revolving around, and I wanted to strangle the good Dr. Gareth Millwood, but
who doesn't?
But it was a good. It's a day I look back upon very fondly now.
Nice. Well, yeah. Okay. So QBasic has been thrown around, and there's also been this lingering question that no one has answered, which is, how old are we? I was born in 1980, and my first computer was a Commodore 64. So I had a very early introduction in childhood to the lovely environment of BASIC. I did not understand any of the advanced BASIC functionality, peek and poke, this and that, but I wanted to try and make my own games. So I made some choose your own adventure type games in BASIC on the Commodore 64. My crowning achievement was in QBasic when I programmed in this pseudo I want to say point and click. It wasn't really a point and click. It was again a text adventure, and instead of doing a parser, which I would have no idea how to do, I had this command line, like you see, look, get, talk to, all these sort of verbs, and you only had to type in what it is you wanted to do something to. And I was really proud of that, because QBasic only has this subroutine system. So I was really proud of getting that to work, and I started making a Space Quest fan game, like you do. And I got to some point in the story, and I just ran out of memory. QBasic has this really low memory cap.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So I went to the trouble of making it a 2-parter. So you got up to a certain point, and then the game said, right, now you can start part 2. And once I finished part 2, I was like really proud. And this is, again, early days of internet. I was really proud. I had saved it to a floppy disk. I was going to upload it very laboriously somewhere. And I was doing my final checks on part 2 just to make sure that things were working exactly as they were. And I accidentally saved over part 1. So that story is both my crowning achievement in programming and also my biggest failure.
So speaking of part 2, something interesting just happened in that we've talked about James a bunch of times, and an alarm clock that may have been set incorrectly or gone off too quietly. But it appears as we near the 1 hour, as we just get past the 1 hour mark of this episode, that James has in fact joined us. How are you?
I'm good. I was gonna say, I felt really bad for. Am I audible? First off,
Yes, you are.
Yes.
I felt really bad, but then as I joined the call, we're talking about QBasic, and I was like, safe.
That was just a detour.
The only thing that could wake James up would be if we all started talking about Quick Basic, and it's like a disturbance in the force for him. He just snapped out of his sleep somewhere. Someone is making outrageous Quick Basic claims.
Waking up in a flop sweat.
It's like saying Bloody Mary 5 times into a mirror.
Paul, I'm really sorry. I overslept, unfortunately. I've had like this awful feeling today done, and I was like so much in pain. I was like, I'm just gonna sleep it off. Just 5 more minutes, you know.
Well, I'm very sorry you missed the chat. We've been saying nothing but nice things about your capabilities in
Oh, that's
AGS
so
and
sweet.
beyond. And every time we've run into some sort of technical explanation, something we couldn't quite work out, we've been like, oh yeah, well, Spanos is gonna join us any minute now to correct us all. So you've been sorely missed, yes.
Oh, that's so sweet. But I'm pretty sure that Mark was like, but I don't know much, but in QBasic when I was in college. So my grandfather.
Yeah, so you have to fact check one thing, James. My recollection is that when we were doing the wiring puzzle in Primordia, I came up with a solution to the problem of moving the cursor too fast and skipping over like a crossing point of the two wires. And I came up with a solution in Quick Basic that you were able to implement in AGS. But I said, it's possible you just said, sure, we'll use your Quick Basic solution and then solved it some other way. But am I remembering that correctly?
I remember something of the sort. I don't know what we ended up using, and having fixed one issue that it had lately after 10 years, I'll say I don't know what's happening in that script at this point. But no, I remember that. I do remember that you did something for sure. Whether it ended up being helpful or not doesn't really matter. It matters that, you tried to make it helpful. But I remember that very vividly. No. I remember that because that was my problem. It was like I would just say, hey, I have this issue. It's like I'm not exactly asking for help. I'm just kind of venting. And Mark would be like, so I coded all of this in QBasic, which is entirely unlike AGS and absolutely useless. And will not help you, and probably doesn't work in QBasic either. But here it is, because if I'm Mark Yohalem, there are two things I am: a wonderful person, a lawyer, but I'm also the QBasic master.
that went from the most diplomatic answer ever to just a fucking stab in the back in one fell swoop. That was amazing. Since you're here, I kind of want to field the same question that we've been, sort of ending the episode on, and I have a feeling this is going to be a big. I know this is like you've just woken up and now you're being thrust into this whole scenario. But I want to throw this last question we've been batting around, since both myself and my co-host Frederick and Mark, we've had experience dabbling in AGS, but none of us are like really experts. So we've been talking about what did you accomplish in AGS that you thought there's no way in hell this is going to work. There's no way in hell the engine is supposed to be able to do this, and you do it anyway. And for some strange fucking reason, it actually worked. And you're like, holy shit, how did that actually work? Can you think of an example of something you've done where you just went, holy shit, I can't believe that worked?
Of course, transposing QBasic scripts to AGS is the single greatest accomplishment. I'm sorry.
That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. That's how
Wormwood fell apart.
Yeah. I hope everybody knows how much I love Mark, even though it is things. Anyway, the thing is, I think I would say the most impressive thing, at least that I think anybody has done, is the fact that there is, like a save system that is relevant of adding things to it, which was done in Strangeland. But that is really not that impressive, because all it does is just like save it's just an array of variables, and I just put I just fill the array. There's nothing great about that. Literally, there's really nothing. It sounds silly that this is impressive, but like in terms of code, it's not something that can be accomplished. I think the one that I felt was like, holy shit, we're doing magic was definitely doing the ASDL audio engine. So when we did when we started doing Strangeland, Vic goes to me. He says, "Hey, I'd really like to do like something like iMuse from Mankialan too." And I'll be honest, iMuse is entirely different than anybody thinks what it does. Like everybody thinks iMuse does this, but it does something completely different. And I know this because I'm also one of those people that have this misconception. So Vic and I had the same misconception of it, which is fine. I was like, yeah, we're gonna make the most impressive audio thing. So I looked up for audio things and I found SDL and I was like, oh my God, we can do this. I just have to code it in a plugin and in C++. Anyway, by the way, that had an null exception for like 2 years. That the guy we did the switch port with found it and was like, you have a null exception here, right? And I go, no, but thank you. That explains that one guy that has been complaining that after 30 minutes the game crashes. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, iMuse is really yeah. I mean, we've been talking about issues with first of all the save games. Like you touch one line in the global script and the whole thing fucking collapses. So actually, just fixing save games in AGS is an achievement all unto itself. And the fact that you try to do a dynamic music system in AGS, because Fred was talking about how he just wanted 2 tracks to transition into each other after the first track finished, and it just shut its mouth and it just wouldn't play the next track. Like the music system is also really cumbersome in AGS. So if you actually did that, holy crap.
There's also the fact that iMuse is cursed, because at one point we wanted to do an episode with a friend, a mutual friend of Trolls and myself, who has apparently done a music system that works like iMuse, except for, audio recordings, not MIDI data. And this particular episode fell apart because he couldn't get his audio working. So, it's definitely...
you had to bring up that one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. My favorite episode. Yeah. Well, you said drunk. I didn't, but...
I had a drunk meltdown.
Curse system.
Completely. Did you actually do the... iMuse thing, or did you just throw your hands and went, yeah, let's just pretend we did that?
We just essentially did exactly what iMuse does, but not even remotely close. We just do manual crossfades. The thing is, I wanted to use SDL because we always had this problem that we would put sounds, and then Mark would, like, the most common bug in the documents that Mark would put would be like, I was playing the game and I was doing this UI, and the sounds keep cutting off. And I'm like, okay, I'll just do my own engine. And initially, that was not going to be the case. I messaged, I believe, I believe I messaged Crimson, who was really busy.
Oh yeah, the other guy in the AGS forums who always replies. We've had Snarky brought up, but yeah, Crimson is the other guy.
Yeah. Crimson is a wonderful person. He does so much for the AGS. And I was like, hey, should we move to like a cross-platform? And I think SDL is a great thing. And he was like, he's like, everybody asks him of like all the stupid things, I'm sure. So he was like, not negative, but he was like, dismissive, but not in a bad way, not in a awful way. He really helped me set up the plugin. I didn't know anything about plugins at the time and how to set them up. And I was just like, he was like explaining how null errors happen and how like allocation works for set. Anyway, he was really awesome. But at the time, like, nobody wanted to implement it, which was understandable. I mean, I had to listen. Like, if you do a mistake with audio sampling, you get like screeching audio, or you get like a thing that says, on your Windows, you have to restart your audio device because Windows shut it off because you did something dumb. Anyway, long story short, I get through the awful experience of implementing SDL audio very wrongfully on my end, and then about when we're done with production, they do it anyway.
Whoops.
Yeah, we're making AGS 3.6 with SDL audio. I think it's a great step forward, but unfortunately, Strangeland is like stuck in this limbo of not being able to move to 3.6 without losing everything, and being forced to move to 3.6 because it gains also everything else. So
Oh, is that the bug that you were talking about, Mark, where there's one thing that's keeping Strangeland from being ported to Switch is, something breaks and it is essential to how the game works, but it just breaks?
It's a visual thing. James can explain
sorry.
it better than I can.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
yeah, so the two things that really, besides the fact that I also did the audio thing, was like adding visual effects, because for no reason nobody ever thought like converting Shader language to just SEP language, and then thinking that the plugin could run it fast enough that you could pre-render the frames and then put them in an anime. Like, I don't know. I don't know what's the motivation behind all that. Maybe I just want to prove, Mark, that some things are just better than QBasic, I guess. But,
I was biting my tongue when you were talking about the audio system. I was saying, well, Mark could probably do it in QBasic, but I held off.
He said that. He said that at some point.
QBasic did not have a good audio system. I will acknowledge it would have been hard for me to do more than beeps and boops in QuickBasic.
Well, that has its charm.
Unfortunately, there's like three functions that the Switch is having trouble with, and two of them were like based on the save system. We would have to, I don't know what we would have to do. Like, I rewired absolutely an awful amount of things, and it ended up to being like 5 functions not having an existence on the engine, Switch engine part, and 2 of them were like the save system. And if there is no save system, like everything is based on that.
Yeah, that would be a pretty awful experience.
Yeah, and then we'd have to replace the rotation mirror puzzle too. That would be another thing. We couldn't rotate sprites. Yeah, that was a trouble. So it's like stuck in limbo. And I think like Strangeland is kind of cursed when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Which is awful, because there's been an awful amount of work done both by me and Eduardo on it, but it's just like stuck in this. I don't know. It's an awful limbo.
Could we just quickly ask, because he hasn't been mentioned yet, Eduardo is who?
Oh, sorry, Eduardo is the guy that made the Nintendo Switch engine counterpart for Unavowed and Primordia. He's handling that for Wajidai Games.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Shit. I almost feel like inviting you back for a part 2. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but we've been chatting about different engines and different ways of making point and click adventure games, the pros, the cons of using Adventure Game Studio, which on the surface has a very easy entry level, but once you want to get into the weeds, stuff starts getting a little more complicated. What drew you to Adventure Game Studio as opposed to the more like free adventure, like more freedom of action engines out there?
So back in, I think, 2005, 6, something along there, this one Greek magazine called PC Master, great name by the way, made like this was like a magazine I was reading when I was a kid. Like, I saw Tomb Raider 2 on that thing, and I was like, one day it's gonna be Tomb Raider 3 and it's gonna have my name. That's what I thought.
Ambition. I like it.
Yeah. I never made Tomb Raider 3, but I did get an article of Primordia and PC Mastering. It was really great. Um, anyway, so they made like this. They had like they would always have like a CD when you would buy the magazine with like a lot of stuff. So they had like this section on the CD where they were like make your own game, and they had like the equivalent section in the thing. So I kept there were like a bunch of engines. I only remember now Ogre 3D and AGS because I had like a folder that was called Make a Game, which was my AGS folder for years because I deleted everything but the AGS 2.71 engine on it because I didn't like any other engine. And I was like, oh, I can make Monkey Island 3 because Ron Gilbert, as sure as hell, is not going to make it.
Well, that aged well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, I mean, getting proven wrong, 30 years down the line? That's not too bad, is it?
I mean, to be honest, Ron Gilbert sent me a message and said, I played your horrible Monkey Island game. And I was like, I gotta come back to this franchise.
Excellent.
No, I've never interacted with Ron, so that's good. I'm glad he made that. I have not finished it yet. I've played like about 5 hours into it.
Oh shit. Well, yeah. So like I said, we were technically wrapping up when you joined, but I'm really happy that you did. I'm very sorry about the reasons why you didn't join at the start.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed it. Honestly, I feel really bad, and I'm sorry
No
for
worries.
abandoning.
We'll try to do another session at some point where it's more convenient for you. I'm sure we can get that arranged.
I don't think I've ever lost an interview. I think, but Mark could correct me. Maybe he has like
we
a
had
calendar.
to be the first. Oh yeah, we had to. This whole episode has been fucking cursed. Our third co-host hasn't got fucking internet because his landlord fucked him over. It's been a great evening, but Mark has kept us entertained with all his Q basic stories.
Yeah.
I was halfway into answering my own question about my greatest feat, and I got as far as the Q basic thing when you joined, which may have put you off. I think the thing I'm most proud of doing in AGS is I did a jam game, which was purposely going to be the most hostile adventure game of all time. It was going to make every mistake that you should never make in adventure games. And one of those was having the most cumbersome UI of all time. I think we had close to 20 verbs that you could select in the UI. And that wasn't even the hard part. That was relatively easy. What I had to do with the inventory management system was to somehow bypass AGS's fairly easy to use and fairly user friendly inventory handling system. I wanted to have the inventory to be as cumbersome as possible too. So I wanted you to be able to only scroll one inventory item at a time. And in order to use it on anything, you had to click equip and then use it on something in the game world. And if you wanted to put it away, you had to click unequip. And the way I solved that was to squeeze down AGS's internal inventory box to the size of a single inventory item, and then constantly check which inventory item is on the top of the list, and then apply that. It seems so simple. When I'm talking to someone who actually knows AGS, it seems like no effort whatsoever. But I was super proud that I somehow made AGS's inventory system so fucking awful.
I think that's a feat for sure, because that's like, I think that's a very standardized system. Like, there's not much you can do with inventory. I don't spend much time on it.
No, it's just it works out of the box.
Yeah. It's like you add inventories, you remove inventories. That's about it. There's nothing more you can do. But then you have like this innate need. But what if the inventory scrolls? But scrolls like fluidly, like how like a window scrolls. This is where the mistakes happen.
Oh yeah. The other thing I did in that game, and I don't want to take over the conversation or anything, but we had a labyrinth and we had a monster that would randomly show up in the labyrinth and chase the player around. And that code, and again, it could be because I'm not a very good programmer. That code was so fucking ass backwards that in the first iteration, the monster would just come out of solid walls and would chase the player around as it was supposed to, but it was always one screen behind, so it would come out where it wasn't supposed to. And like on the night we had to turn the game in, I was working with another guy who was doing the story and the dialogue. I said, you know what, I'm gonna reprogram the monster, and it was like 10 in the evening, and we had until 2 a.m. to turn the game in. And he was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And I was like, "Yeah, this bugs me." So I ended up rewriting the code on the night we were supposed to deliver the game. I was pretty happy. He ended up working. He was a little less or a little more predictable than he was supposed to be, but at least he didn't like fucking come out of solid walls, which was good.
I think we started. Strangeland started as a jam game. I told both Vic and Mark, who were under the. Well, I mean, nobody was under the impression that it was going to be a jam game. I think deep down in their hearts. But I was like, I remember I was like on vacation at the time, and I was telling my friends I was replying to an email, and they said, "What's that about?" I go, "We're making a game. I'll see you guys in like 3 years when we finish."
Yeah, that checks out. Feature creep is a bitch. Yeah, so we try to keep the episodes at around an hour, and we're close to an hour and a half. So if we're just going to do the wrap up now. Very sorry about that.
No, don't apologize. Don't apologize.
Yeah, but at least you get a chance to plug yourself and your projects now. So
yes, please.
I know this is going to be a silly question to anyone listening already familiar with your games, but where can everyone else find what you've worked on, or get in touch with either of you if they have a proposition on how to fix the unsolvable Switch error that's keeping Strangeland from that platform?
So they can find us at wormwoodstudios.com. That's our website. That's one thing. Another thing, they can find us on Twitter. They can find us on Discord. They can find the games, of course, on Steam, GOG, and Switch, except Strangeland, unfortunately, but they can find the rest there.
What about Mac and Linux? Sorry, that was.
Oh yeah.
That's
we
a joke.
do have. No, that's true. We do have. Everything is ported except Switch. Unfortunately, the games are also available on Steam Deck and verified. Somebody actually said to me that they had like this website that. Wadget Eye Games has like the biggest percentage of any publisher that has ported games on their Steam Deck out of any publisher on Steam. At least they did at the time we did the Steam Deck things. I'm not sure if that's still the case, which is nice. That's an accomplishment, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Though Mark would say that the biggest accomplishment was the QBasic part, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Mark, where can people find your amazing abilities in QBasic?
Nowhere. Yeah, so we're, like Jim said, all the places he listed, and then our current project is Fallen Gods. That's one I've been working on now for 10.5 years. James has been working on it for about 3 years.
Started in QBasic.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been done if I had done it in QBasic. But
yeah, for sure.
We're hoping maybe the end of this year, maybe early next year for a release. It's not a point-and-click adventure, but it draws a lot of sensibilities from our experience in adventure game design of interesting items and meaningful encounters, but it has a lot of role-playing game elements in it as well, and we really look forward to sharing it with our fans.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, yes,
that about does it. I know Fred is about to keel over from exhaustion, so I'm going to wrap this up as best as I can. So thank you, first of all, to Mark and James for joining us for this episode. Really appreciate getting the time to talk about game engines, us being of course, the backseat designers, which mean that we know absolutely nothing about game development. we just like giving unsolicited advice to people who actually do this shit for a living. You can find us on my YouTube channel, because some glorious person with an actual doctorate let our domain lapse. So we don't have a website. We don't have an RSS feed. We used to have our own YouTube channel. No one was subscribed to it. So
those were the days. We used to have our own website. We used to have our own RSS feed. We used to have a YouTube channel. We used to have a Patreon. We used to have an online presence.
Yeah, and now we're just stuck on my shitty YouTube channel. But anyway, if you are not passed out the way Fred is about to, then please keep in touch and check out our new episodes when they come out. And I guess that's about it, unless you have something you want to chime in with, Fred.
No, not really. I just want to second that it's been an absolute pleasure, and a trip down memory lane, and a trip into hostile technical territory that I hope I never have to see myself in again.
Yeah. So yeah, that's been it for us. Thank you again to Mark and James, and we'll see you guys in the next episode, whenever that will be. Cheers. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you again for having us.
Our pleasure.
Nå, det er lækkert.